Welcome to Third Wave Business Systems Advanced Productivity Packs, Pivot Grids, and Key Performance Indicators Functionality Overview. My name is Dennis Tucker. I'm the Development Manager at Third Wave, and today I'll be showing you how to take advantage of these new robust data analysis features in Advanced Productivity Pack in your SAP Business One environment. The heart and soul of any analysis, using pen and paper, an Excel spreadsheet, or a robust data visualization tool like a pivot grid, starts with a solid foundation of data. For this demonstration, I've set up a query pulling data on all sales orders from my database, joined to the business partner table, the customer group table, and the salesperson table, providing me with a variety of information about these orders that can be used for analysis. My query is saved in SAP Business One. Now I'll take you through the steps in the Advanced Productivity Pack to analyze this data using a pivot grid. The first step is to register the query in APP as a query. Going into the Administration, Setup, APP Setup, Report Definitions menu will bring up the Report Definitions screen in Add mode. We're going to click the Query Option button, and I'm going to go and select my query from the list of queries in SAP. I'll choose the Pivot Chart Sales Analysis Demo query, enter a descriptive name, Pivot Chart Sales Analysis. Once I've entered the name for my query, I'll select the APP category that I would like the query to be saved in. In this case, I'm going to pick one I set up for demos for pivot grids, slider controls, and gauges. The company database is set to the database that I'm using. I'll copy the query name and also enter that as the description. And I'm going to leave link to set to none so that this is not associated with any particular forms in SAP but can be run independently. I'll select the option for APP query, and if I want to load any associated charts or load the pivot grid, I'll check the boxes as needed. In order to set the default rows, columns, and aggregates for my pivot grid, I need to use the Query Preferences screen. But first, I need to add the definition to APP so that my query definition is saved before I can launch the screen. Once the query is saved, I can go back and click on the button to launch the Query Preferences screen. If you've selected to load the pivot grids for your query, you'll see some pivot-specific columns available on the Query Preferences screen, including Pivot Group and Set KPI. For this demonstration, I'm going to set Customer Name as my column, Salesperson Name as my row, and Order Total as my aggregate row. Once these basic pivot properties are set, I can update my query preferences and return to my Report Definitions screen. I'll select the Enabled box so that the query will appear on the APP menu, uncheck the associated chart since I'm only going to look at my pivot grid, update the query definition, and click the button to refresh the APP menu. Once the APP menu has been refreshed, click on the APP Reports menu, the category that you put your query in, and the description of your query. Your query will load in the TWBS chart viewer, and the data will show on the Data tab as it always has, but there's a new Pivot Grid tab at the top. Click on the tab to display your pivot grid. On the right-hand side, there's a Pivot Grid control area. You'll notice that our customer name is listed for the column, the salesperson name for the row, and that our aggregate of the order totals is listed in the Value section. To add additional rows to the pivot grid to greater group our data, I simply go up to the list of fields and select the one I would like to add, as I've done here with Customer Group. As you can see, Customer Group has now been added as a grouping underneath the salesperson name. The Pivot Grid control panel can also break down date fields like the order date from my query into its components. Selecting Order Date Year adds it as another grouping row in my pivot grid. To change the order of grouping rows in my pivot grid, I can simply go to the Row section of the Pivot Grid control, click on one of the titles and drag it up or down to change the order. As you can see, I've placed the Order Date Year ahead of the Customer Group now, and the data in the pivot grid has refreshed automatically. I can also drag it back to the original configuration just as easily, with the pivot grid again automatically reflecting the changes. To make changes to your pivot grid control panel and not have those changes immediately reflect in your pivot grid, select the checkbox labeled Defer Layout Update at the bottom of the pivot grid control panel. This will enable an update button. Once you've completed all of the modifications you'd like to make to your pivot grid, click the Update button to make the pivot grid refresh and reflect your changes. Pivot grid data filtering is available. However, if you're going to filter data for the pivot grid, be sure to use a field that is not one of the fields designated as a row, column, or aggregate in your pivot grid. To demonstrate data filtering, I'm going to click and drag my customer code field into the report filter section below. If I click at the arrow at the right of the title, I can select the items that I want to filter. I'm going to deselect several of the customer codes, choose an operator from the provided list for my filtering functionality. There's a filter text entry box and an ignore case checkbox if you need them for your data filtering requirements. If I click the OK button, you'll notice that the data in my pivot grid now reflects only those customer codes I had selected in my data filtering. If I want to remove a row from my pivot grid, the customer group for example, I simply need to click and drag the row title up into the field area. You'll notice the red X below it that indicates that it will be removed, and now my pivot grid has refreshed to show sales order totals by year for each of the salespersons. Now let's say you want to flip this pivot grid. You would like to have the customers on the rows and the salespersons on the columns. Simply take one of them, in this case the salesperson row, drag it over to the column, and drag the customer name back to the row. As you can see, the pivot grid has refreshed, so now I've got customers for each of the years. If I want to flip that, simply drag the order date year down below customer name. Now it's sorted by customer name first and order date year second. If I click on the arrow at the right of the row title, I'll get a number of options, including some data sorting options. So if I wanted to have my year most recent come first, I could sort from Z to A. Now as you can see, my most recent years are at the top of the customer name groups. Next, I'm going to show you how to set some key performance indicators that you can use in your analysis on the pivot grid. In order to do that, we need to return to the report definition screen for our query and go into the query preferences screen. When we chose the order total as an aggregate row, a button appeared in the Set KPI column. If you click on that button, the Key Performance Indicators detail screen will appear. The first column allows you to select an operator for your KPI, less than, greater than, or between. For the first KPI here, I'm going to select less than and enter my value so the KPI will indicate if it's less than $75,000. For the icon type, I can pick red, green, or yellow. For the show column value in the pivot grid, I can select the value only, the icon only, or both the value and the KPI icon. I can also select the list of the aggregate functions. Since my KPIs here are going to indicate the sum of the order total, I'm going to leave it as sum, but you can also choose from average, count, maximum, or minimum. The second key performance indicator I'm going to add for this example is going to be a between indicator with a value on the low end of $75,000 and on the high end of $150,000. I'll make the icon type yellow. For my third indicator, it'll be a greater than indicator with a value of $150,000. I'll make the icon type green and click the update button on my KPI details screen. Click OK. Click the update button on the query preferences window and click OK. Update my query definition and refresh the APP menu. Once the APP menu is refreshed, we can reload our query on the TWBS chart viewer screen. Click on our pivot grid tab, and now you'll notice that in addition to the sum aggregates of the order totals by salesperson for each customer, we also get a circular icon that's colored according to our key performance indicators. If I drag down the order date year into the row to summarize underneath the salesperson, You'll notice that as the pivot grid refreshes and the data is expanded to different groupings, the key performance indicators change based on the individual cell of the pivot grid. I now have a number of indicators that are in our green, which is the greater than category, some that are in our yellow or between category for 75,000 to 150,000, and a large number of values that are below our $75,000 first KPI threshold and are therefore marked with the red indicator. The new Advanced Productivity Pack Pivot Grids and Key Performance Indicators functionality puts an incredible asset in your hands to give you robust, easy to use data visualization and analysis tools to meet your every need. Your imagination is your only limitation in the ways that APP and Third Wave can help you manage your business better. For more information on Third Wave's Advanced Productivity Pack or any of the other applications that Third Wave offers, please visit our website at www.twbs.com. You can click the Contact Us link in the upper right corner of the page. Existing Third Wave partners and customers can obtain more information through the support portal by clicking the customer support link in the upper right corner of the page. Thank you for your time and attention.